Today, we're going to unpack a major new evidence review from the UK's Social Mobility Commission. It's a really deep dive into one of the most persistent and, let's face it, challenging questions the country is facing. It's a question that I think a lot of us have probably asked ourselves at some point. Does where you grow up fundamentally shape your chances in life? Is opportunity really available to everyone, no matter where they are? And look, this isn't just someone's opinion. It's a huge systemic review of all the academic and policy research out there, giving us a really comprehensive look at the hard evidence. So the first big theme the report gets into is this idea of a postcode lottery. It explores the stark reality that opportunity in the UK has a very distinct geography. And right away, the sheer scale of the economic gap is just, well, it's striking. The report points out that the GDP per person in London is more than double that of the Northeast. We're not talking about a small variation here. This is a massive chasm right at the heart of regional inequality. So you might be asking, why? Why do these inequalities stick around for so long? The report introduces a really important concept, the regional development trap. See, this isn't just a temporary slump. It's when a region gets truly stuck, unable to get back its old economic strength or build new prosperity, which leads to this long-term stagnation. And that leads us right into our next section, because a huge driver of this trap is investments, or maybe more accurately, the lack of it. The evidence shows this incredibly clear pattern of where the money flows, and of course, where it doesn't. Just take a look at this number for a second, 82.5%. What on earth could that possibly represent? Well, that 82.5%, that's the share of foreign venture capital, that high-risk, high-reward funding for new businesses, that went to just 3 regions back in 2017. It's an incredible concentration of private cash in areas that are already doing well, which just reinforces that cycle of advantage. And here's the thing, it's not just about private money. The report points out that even the government's own official rulebook for judging projects, the Treasury Green Book, has historically been set up in a way that ends up favoring London and the Southeast, which can actually reinforce these very imbalances. Okay, so the economic gap is one thing, but that gets compounded by another massive issue, the skills divide. From a very young age, the educational playing field is just not even across the country. This chart here really spells it out. If you take recent GCSE results, 72% of exams in London got a grade 4 or higher. But in the West Midlands, that number was only 63%. That's a 9 percentage point difference in basic qualifications for young people, just depending on where they happen to live. And this gap doesn't just magically disappear after school. It carries right on through to university and into the world of work. The report highlights evidence showing that where you're from can impact your career prospects even if you have a degree. So for example, graduates from places like Tameside have a statistically lower chance of getting a top professional job right after graduation compared to their peers from wealthier areas. Now, you might think this is all about academic routes, but it's not. The evidence shows the exact same kinds of inequalities pop up in vocational training too. There are huge ethnic disparities in who gets to start apprenticeships, and geography is a big factor as well, with apprentices in more deprived parts of Scotland being less likely to even finish their training. So, we've got these massive gaps in investment and skills. What about starting your own business as a way to get ahead? Well, the report calls this the entrepreneurship puzzle, and it uncovers some huge barriers for people who are trying to build something new in these so-called left-behind regions. This table from the review is really interesting. It basically weighs the things that help people start businesses against the things that hold them back. And the picture it paints, well, it's pretty stark. Things like social networks and your own skills, they help a bit. But access to money, economic security, and the regional context itself are all heavily weighted as things that stop you. But out of all of this, maybe the most shocking finding is the one for policy support. The evidence that was analyzed suggests government policy itself has often been a strongly deterrent factor for entrepreneurs in deprived areas. In other words, sometimes it's created more obstacles than opportunities. The report looks back at past policies designed to help, things like enterprise zones, and finds that their track record is, well, it's mixed at best. Sure, they might create a few businesses, but often they just end up moving jobs from a town next door rather than creating any genuinely new growth. In fact, fewer than 1 in 5 showed clear benefits for employment. And all of this brings us to the final and maybe the most important theme of the report. If the problems are this deep and the old policies haven't really worked, then what does the evidence say we should do now? The whole discussion turns to a fundamental question of power. So the main path forward that's explored is something called devolution, the idea of shifting real power, real funding, and real decision-making away from the central government and putting it into the hands of the regions themselves so they can actually tailor solutions to their own unique local challenges. But, and this is a really big but, devolution isn't some kind of magic wand you can just wave. The review uses the U.S. Opportunity Zones policy as a bit of a cautionary tale. It attracted a ton of money, sure, but 3/4 of it just flowed to areas that were already commercially attractive. For the people who actually lived there, the policy had little to no positive effect on jobs or poverty. This American experience really raises a critical question for the UK, doesn't it? As Britain continues down its own path of devolution, how can it avoid making these exact same mistakes? Well, the report points to a few key problems with how the UK has been doing things so far. There's been a habit of chasing shiny, new, technological fixes instead of just supporting what's already working on the ground. There's been a lot of focus on the emotion of pride and place instead of tackling the really tough structural reasons for inequality. And at its core, many of these devolved authorities still just don't have the real power or the money to make the kind of transformative change that's needed. So, as we wrap all this up, the central message from this massive review is, well, it's crystal clear. Place matters. It matters profoundly. And if you really want to break these cycles of disadvantage, it's going to take more than just short-term projects or feel-good slogans. It demands sustained, long-term, structural change. Which leaves us with this one final, pretty challenging thought. Can policy, no matter how well-intentioned it is, truly break this deep-rooted cycle? Or is opportunity in the UK, for the foreseeable future, simply destined to have an address?